unplanned experiment in online learning. And we all had to adapt as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of you began teaching online for the first time, experimenting with new platforms, working to reach your students in new ways. And this FailFest is really designed to honor that adaptation, including new risks, new failures, and by helping us really collectively share what we've learned over time. In fact, our webinar goal for today is to share and learn from that failure. And so to begin, I wanted to hear from you about how you have adapted in your online teaching since COVID-19 began. I'd like you to take a few minutes to respond to the following question in the chat. What has changed about your online teaching and learning in the past 2 years? So if you could take a couple of minutes and share just a few words of what's changed. What have you learned? What have you grown from? What failure, risk have you experienced? And let's go ahead and start sharing. Giving everyone a moment to type your answer into the chat. What do you think has changed in the last 2 years for you when it comes to teaching and learning? Oh, thank you, Carrie. Being more flexible. Learning, it takes a lot to be engaged. Absolutely right, Alyssa. Even no matter how the age group of the individuals that you're trying to keep engaged. Humanizing learning, I love that. Flexible deadlines, empathy towards students. I've absolutely experienced that in my own teaching, yes. Making this course more interactive. Maintaining a visual presence, absolutely, yes. Being on camera so people can see you. Chaos initially, finding our feet. Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely chaos. We were all experiencing that. New ways to pay attention and listening and learning. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. Putting more support into faculty development to truly develop digital pedagogies. Yes. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your responses. As we hear from our presenters today, keep on thinking about what has changed about your learning as you reflect and listen to these presentations and how you've grown. And please keep on putting these ideas into the chat. We're actually going to revisit these later in our session. In addition to being your facilitator today, I am the leader of the Higher Education Learning Network, or HELEN, as we sometimes like to call it. I'm a technical advisor at the Education Development Center as well for USAID's Leading Through Learning World platform. And this webinar is actually part of a series of events sponsored by the Higher Education Learning Network, including the event that you see on your screen, which will be happening in May, the Higher Education Global Evidence Summit. And for more information, and if you'd like to register for that event, there's going to be a link in the chat. I encourage you to attend. It's going to be a wonderful event over 3 weeks, half days to prevent Zoom fatigue, but really a great way for this global community to come together and share experiences and knowledge with each other. And then finally, I want to show you our agenda for today. Please note that we will be collecting questions in the chat. So as you hear presenters and have questions, please type that question into the chat. And even if we don't get to them at the end of either of our Q&A sessions, we will respond to them offline and have our storytellers give their responses to you and email that out to you after the event. So please keep your questions coming in. We will try to get to them in one way or another before the end of the day. And now I'd like to begin our program by introducing our keynote speaker. So I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Tori Trust, to come on camera and our other speakers to go off camera in order to preserve bandwidth. And to introduce Dr. Tori Trust, she is an associate professor of learning technology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her scholarship and teaching focus on how technology shapes educator and student learning. Dr. Trust's work in the field of educational technology has received notable recognition, including the 2016 ISTE Online Learning Network Award, the 2019 ARA Technology as an Agent of Change for Teaching and Learning, SIG Early Career Award, and the 2020 AECT Annual Achievement Award. And with that, we're delighted to have you, Dr. Trust, to begin our program, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to start today talking about a book I read just this weekend called Mistakes That Worked. And in this book, it talks about some of the greatest inventions of all time, from penicillin to Post-it notes, and how they came about as a result of accidents, mistakes, and failures. And far too often we focus on the inventor or the invention as a great success, but we don't realize that failure is an important part of that success. But it's not just that some inventor came along and failed and magically it was a success. As you see this arrow pointing to the keyword here, alert. The inventors were alert when something went wrong and reflected upon what went wrong and how can I turn this failure into a success. So I consider myself to be an inventor and an innovator in education. And I'm going to give you a short story about how I have failed, which happens often, in one of my classes over a period of years, which I turned that into successes. So in my first year seminar, I teach the Richard Mayer's multimedia design principles, which are 12 principles about effective multimedia design. In the past, I originally just went through 12 slides, and it was quite boring and teacher-centered, and I noticed my students' eyes would glaze over, and I was realizing they're not getting this. So I had what I thought was this brilliant idea of having students not only learn about the Richard Mayer design principles through design, but through their own research rather than me telling them about these principles. So they would learn about the design principles, all 12, pick 3, and then turn them into a Powtoon animated video. Now, what I haven't said is that these first year seminar classes are 50 minutes. And if you're not familiar with Powtoons, it can take about 50 minutes to learn just the basics of how to create maybe 1 second rather than a 3-minute production. So I called this class an epic fail. And some students actually left crying. Some students were very frustrated and angry that they couldn't even start the task because they were so overwhelmed with Powtoon because of its user interface. And I ended up apologizing to the students the next week and saying, hey, I took a risk, I tried, I clearly failed, I'll figure out how to do this better next time. So the next time the class rolled around the following year, I had come across this idea of a digital choice board through the ISTE professional learning networks. And I thought, what a great idea. Give students choice in what tool they use rather than telling them they have to use a specific tool. And that will put the learning in students' hands. They won't get as frustrated. It won't be as teacher-centered. So I created this whole digital media design choice board. I put Powtoon in there as an option, but they could pick any other tool in the choice board. And so I gave this activity to the students. I said, go and learn about Richard Mayer design principles and then pick any of these tools to design something about what you learned. And I failed again, which happens often. Some students spent all 50 minutes of class trying to figure out which tool to use because they were so overwhelmed with the choices and they weren't familiar with tools. So in the third iteration, I discovered a way to make it even better and turn it into a success by having students, having less choices for students. And then if students did have trouble figuring out the tool, I just have a note that says, please reach out to the course instructor if it's an online course, or I walk around the room and I help students decide on the tool really quickly. And I have some examples. And I can tell you this led to great success. And I've used this model ever since because students feel empowered. They get to pick their tool. They get to learn through their own knowledge construction rather than me talking at them. Next slide. So ultimately, I see failure not as the opposite of success, but as a part of it. Failure became something that I was reflecting upon, apologizing to students for taking risks, and they understood, and then figuring out how can I make this better. And every time that I reflected upon it, I'm thinking, how do I make this better and better? So ultimately, in order to succeed, you need to fail. And in order to fail, you need to be willing to take risks. Next slide. So I'll leave you with the wise words of Erica Jong. The trouble is, if you don't risk anything, you risk more. So I encourage you all today to think about how you can take more risks, which may lead to more failures, but with some observation and reflection, you will ultimately lead to more success. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Trust. It's a wonderful introduction to why risk and failure and innovation are so closely tied together and so important for teaching and learning and for so many other things. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if you all have any questions or comments in the chat, feel free to add those in now. But I'd like to actually turn our attention to our FailFest presenters, our storytellers. As a reminder, if you have questions during any of their presentations, type them into the chat. We'll have a couple of opportunities to do Q&A. And I'd like to introduce our first presenter who is here now. Dr. Wezi Makwaila from the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Malawi, who will be sharing her FailFest story first. Dr. Makwaila?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. She said, my name is Wezi. So I'm in Malawi. Malawi is in southern East Africa. So since the pandemic, we tested trying to deliver courses online. So traditionally, there have been courses that have been delivered online, but these are not the hard courses. So, but the courses that I teach are particularly hard, and they require a lot of contact time and physical time in the field. So on the onset of the pandemic, when the country instituted lockdowns, we had to innovate and come up with ways to continue taking our courses online, those that had never been traditionally delivered online. So this is like a typical classroom, class size of the courses that I teach, but it always has a field component. So there's time in class, and then there's time in the field. So next slide, please. So yeah, we had empty campuses. The government had ordered lockdown, so no one was moving about. So our institution had what we called ERTL, in Emergency Remote Teaching and Learning, and the official platform for the institution is Moodle. So we had to adapt learning that firstly for the instructors and then also for the students. So for the instructors, it was about learning how to deliver content online, develop lessons, videos, everything, and notes. For the students, just accessing the technology itself. Next slide, please. So we knew something wasn't right when Malawi being a developing country, there's already resource constraints, but then the university itself doesn't have enough staff to manage online learning. So there was only a few IT support people for the whole institution. Everyone had to take their questions to them. Every little glitch in the matrix, they had to answer that. And then there was also a mismatch. Students were not used to Moodle, the official platform, but they were used to other ways to get online, especially the social media platforms, WhatsApp and Facebook and all the others. And then even if we develop content, let's say I did a video or something, like a lot of that required a lot of bandwidth, so the students could not access it because they had limited access to data itself. So they may have a gadget, but they don't have the wherewith to get online. So those were our constraints, and we just knew that something is not right because we'd go log into Moodle and wouldn't find, because it has a way to register who has logged in, there would be very few that were online. So we just had to pivot. Next slide. So the first thing we did was to start modifying the content to fit platforms that the students were able to use. So Moodle wasn't working. We didn't have enough computers, and then we were not able to, couldn't gather them in a computer room, but everyone has a smartphone, and smartphones have WhatsApp. So they said, can we try WhatsApp groups? So you develop content, send it on a WhatsApp group, slides, voice notes, everything that supports learning. So because of that, we decided, okay, let's take it, even though it's an informal platform, let's make that the formal way to share notes, to share content, and to have class. So everyone could access WhatsApp, and then everyone participated because, they would be sitting in their homes, in everywhere they were at, but they could have access to that. And from that, there was a lot of interaction because it was an open group. They would respond, they would ask questions there, and I could see who has opened the documents. And so students were very, very responsive. So what we really learned out of this was flexibility. Use the platform that the students are already using, something that they are already familiar with, and something they could afford. And also, they're already, talking to their friends. They're making, actually, WhatsApp is so popular in this part of the world that people do business, people do life, they do community on WhatsApp. So that worked for us. For that 1 year that we were out of the classroom, WhatsApp was our platform for sharing content, for teaching, basically. I would send in voice notes and everyone would respond to that. Yeah, next slide. So at the end of it, everyone passed, and it wasn't a fluke. I thought it was a fluke, but the students had been engaged. They really passed, double grading, checking the grades over and over again. Even an independent assessor, they ascertained that they had passed. And what we learned is, work with the systems that are working. for your part of the corner of the world you're in. For us, WhatsApp was the easiest, was what the students had. But then we learned that if we were able to take this course online, what have we been missing out on? I mean, could we increase access by taking in more students online? Because we had always thought it's impossible to deliver this kind of course online. But then we know that it may not be totally doable, but a blended approach is something that we're thinking about, but we don't want to lose the lessons that we have learned in adapting a typical practical based course to have it delivered online. So is there a way we can, leverage on this and even access to better programs that are offered outside for our students here so they can have the double benefit of fieldwork in Malawi, but attending a classroom elsewhere, and integrating other, more better techniques like VR and getting all the gadgets. So yeah, that's the lessons we learned from Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wezi. You have some wonderful supportive comments in the chat of wonderful adaptations, especially for a difficult content course. So thank you so much for sharing. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we're going to move on to our next FailFest story with Mr. Ali Hamza from the American University of Science and Technology in Lebanon, who will share his FailFest. Mr. Hamza.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm really glad to be here and share my story, which is actually it's how failure was turned into success, but because or due to fear of failure. So my story will be about how we had the courage to save our program that caters for the educational needs of students with learning disabilities. At the beginning of this shift to online classes, we thought that our students would not be able to follow this new teaching technology, and that it would be better for them to attend face-to-face, of course, because this would be better. So we just could not fathom the idea of losing the opportunity to be in class, which is like, the class to us is like the stage where we connect, where we relate, where we help students facilitate their learning and everything. So we couldn't understand that we have to let this go and change. So we really were worried about how our students would practice their skills, how they would witness their progress, and feel confident about it. So we froze the program, but we had no real plan on what to do next, No matter what our reasons were, thinking back, I would say that we were essentially afraid of failing. This was all new to us, and the idea scared us. Despite this validity of many of our reasons, we found that, well, wait, canceling the program would do much more harm to our students' future than failing at trying to provide them with the opportunity of continuing their education under this pandemic-imposed online education rules. So after a pause of almost a month of doing nothing, almost nothing, we started using the existing digital communication channels, mainly emails and WhatsApp, by communicating with students, for just keeping in touch with our students and sending them revision worksheets, or conduct basic virtual meetings to review lessons and reflect. By then, we started sensing that things cannot go on like this. It seemed like the pandemic was there to stay, and we had to think of a more sustainable strategy to stimulate our students' development. We knew that these methods were not working. Our students started voicing out their confusion. They mainly suffered from miscommunication, interrupted learning. These gaps in their learning became very evident. The parents' role was becoming more and more limited. Moreover, instructors' level of commitment was shaky. So we drifted away from a well-structured and least restrictive educational environment, which are the key elements in special education, to an ambiguous environment full of limitations. This is not working at all. This led to a state of regression and ultimately a loss of learning for our students, which was dangerous. Even though it was a chaotic period for everyone, it seems that our students were the ones mostly affected by it. So we decided to resume the program by offering online classes. So what we did was, of course, we had to involve different parties. We had to go through many steps. We started by conducting training sessions for the instructors on Blackboard. So we focused on Blackboard. We enrolled our students in online classes using the Blackboard. Obviously, we collaborated with the IT department at the university and utilized everything available, all available resources. Then we conducted training sessions and created tutorial videos for the students and their parents together, because parents are essential in this. We also conducted follow-up sessions with continuous guided support. We intended to involve all necessary players in utilizing all available resources to serve our students' benefit. This shift, which was from just cowering away in fear of failure to putting ourselves out there and involving the key stakeholders, made all the difference. Working with students with learning abilities needs planning, collaboration, and a certain level of faith. This is what we didn't have at the beginning. It is a conviction. It is the conviction of not giving up, and that makes for the best advocacy in the face of challenges. This is what we learned. It was a courageous move, especially that there were many qualms about whether it would be useful and to what extent it would contribute to students' progress. However, 2 years later, we are very glad that we believed in our abilities and made the decision without which our program would have been gone. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both Ali and Wezi, for sharing your stories of adaptation and seeing sort of the differences in your technology approaches and how they both worked for both of your student populations. I'm welcoming questions in the chat, but we have a few minutes for Q&A. And I'd like to start off just by asking you both, what do you think you will take forward in the future? Wezi, you sort of talked about this, about whether or not you want to expand access to your classes online. But I'm wondering if there are any other lessons that you both plan to take forward in the future. And Ali, would you mind getting us started?
Yeah, well, basically, there's one major lesson. It's just a shift in our perspective, because you see, this is a new period. So as with everything we do with our students who have learning disabilities, the main drive or the main aim is for them to be integrated in the world, in their community, in the workplace. So we figured, I mean, this new online era is a very valuable opportunity for us to integrate them, because they're going to use it for anything they do. So that was the shift. And it is actually a learning skill. It is actually a learning skill for our students to be good or to adapt to the tools, learning online, digital platforms, everything, not being afraid for it. So this was a major punchline.
Wonderful. Yes, it is learning, right? Even in our failures, we're teaching and we're learning in that process, both for ourselves and for our students. You're absolutely right. Wezi, there's a question that came in about your adaptation using WhatsApp. Do you think that you might go back and using a combination of LMS like Moodle to hosting material, or combining the technologies in some way to reach your students better?
So I think I would want to maintain both platforms. So the Moodle is like the official platform, but the WhatsApp has a way to, I guess for me, it was more engaging because the students would not complain about that. And then the government, as I said, came in and then they reduced the data bundle cost. And that's the permanent one. It wasn't just, it was pandemic triggered, but it has remained. So data has really come down in this country. So I'm thinking, because that's the technology the students are most familiar with, so we're still supplementing. So I still do physical, we have since resumed physical classes, but for quick sharing of notes, for quick communication, email is even is worse. That WhatsApp is better than all the other platforms. So I can communicate, okay, let's shift class and all that. So we're trying to see how best we can continue with that, even though we're doing physical classes. And then the content that we developed during the pandemic to make things easier for them, that is ongoing. So I've learned to simplify material without diluting the content, to be able
That's a great lesson. Yes.
Yeah.
Simplifying material but not diluting the content. Wonderful. Thank you both for questions. I'm seeing more questions come into the chat, but I do want to get to our next two FailFest presenters. So I'm going to move us on. But again, just a reminder, please keep the questions in the chat. We'll have more time for that later and in a follow-up email afterwards. So I'm going to invite Ali and Wezi to turn off their cameras and to invite Dr. Soraya Golub, who will be our next FailFest presenter, to come on camera and to present her story. Thank you so much.
And I guess unmuting would be helpful as well. Thank you, Jennifer, for your warm welcome, and it's lovely to see you all. So we're coming from a slightly different space. Unlike our colleagues in Malawi and Lebanon, we work in a different area of higher education, supporting the ongoing learning of professionals in areas like health and education after they've graduated. Project ECHO began as a way to bring expertise to rural and underserved areas, and now it's a global movement made up of 730 training hubs across 63 countries, with participants in 191 countries, attending over 4,600 programs in the last 18 years. ECHO hubs are universities, governments, NGOs, and community organizations training professionals like physicians and teachers to solve problems in health, education, and other areas. We here at ECHO headquarters in the Institute share the model freely so communities all over the world can create local solutions to local problems. So ECHO is a lot of things. I'm going to focus on one area, which is using the ECHO model to create virtual professional learning and communities of practice for teachers working in K-12 schools in New Mexico. New Mexico is a very rural state with many teachers at least a 4-hour drive from a major center, with very few local colleagues, so they do not have access to professional community or local professional learning. Before the pandemic, we had been running 2 programs focused on long-term problems with long-term solutions, like our ECHO for CTE, which was aimed at increasing graduation rates. Now, because the ECHO model is an online platform for virtual professional learning that creates these communities of practice, we actually started the pandemic with an advantage. We had a proven model and the infrastructure and experience to effectively engage large numbers of educators, but we needed, in a hurry, to work out how to use this to meet the immediate needs of educators in this time of crisis. New Mexico was like the rest of the world, with K-12 education suddenly shifting online when teachers and students were not prepared for this. At the same time, we were also moving online in our institute, and our planned programs no longer made sense for what our communities of practice were facing on the ground. So we pivoted, and in our pivot, we went through 3 steps. Step number 1, normally the best step and first step of any change, is release attachment to the existing plan. Long-term plans are great, but not in a moment of crisis. Step 2, listen to what educators are saying. We spoke to our participants, educators across the states, and experts. We did an informal needs analysis, and we found that they had 2 pressing challenges: handling the technology and tools for online learning, and engaging students virtually in this new and sometimes frightening time of the pandemic. An especially problematic thing when you're thinking about the younger end of that K-12 spectrum. And step 3, what we needed to do was to build programs that weren't only going to work right now, but programs that would adapt to educator needs moving forward. So step 3 was to make reflective processes central to our programs so they respond to the changing needs of educators. Within a week, we designed and launched a series of ECHO teacher professional learning programs focused on these issues. Our attendance ballooned from 15 to an average of 118 per session. Participating educators shared that these programs effectively increased their resilience throughout the pandemic. So what did we learn? By pivoting to respond to immediate educator needs, ECHO virtual communities of practice supported participants in collaboratively creating very local solutions to problems in their communities. We knew we were succeeding when in one ECHO session, our participants had a deep and productive discussion about the challenges of how to get schoolwork to high school students living in the remotest parts of our state on the Navajo Nation, where they do not have reliable internet access, and driving anywhere is very, very long. By offering them a space to engage in dialogue, Project ECHO was able to help these teachers produce a series of workable ideas, including using grocery stores and gas stations as pick-up and drop-off points for student work, which ultimately enabled those students to continue learning throughout the pandemic. And what we've learned through this is a better way of designing programs to meet the needs of teachers in New Mexico and the world. We begin with student and educator needs now, even more than we did before. We then identify central challenges that can effectively be addressed through the ECHO model. And finally, we create a coalition of experts, funders, and community stakeholders to design and implement the program aimed at making effective change. We now, by focusing even more on this need-centered approach, do a better job of building programs that truly integrate local solutions to local problems with evidence-based best practices. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Soraya. I just so appreciate hearing your adaptation to reflection, using reflection to adapt. That was wonderful. So again, questions and comments are coming into the chat. Thank you so much. We're going to go to our last Fail First presenter, Miss Wendy Warren, who is at the Wyoming Institute for Disabilities at the University of Wyoming ECHO Project, to hear a little bit different take on this process. So, Wendy?
Thank you. Good morning. So ours is a little bit different, but we will be focusing again kind of on what Soraya has already talked about and the ECHO model. Educators in rural and frontier communities often have no other tool by which to collaborate with other teachers and professionals in similar settings. The ECHO model provides an active learning content-focused platform that enables collective participation. The Wyoming Institute for Disabilities is an academic unit in the College of Health Sciences at the University of Wyoming, which is our only four-year university in the state, and a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Our purpose is to assist individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, professionals, and University of Wyoming students through education, training, community services, and early intervention. We have been using the ECHO model in education to provide services since 2014. So what we tried, during the fall of 2019, UW ECHO Networks offered 25 sessions with 584 attendees. Spring 2020 sessions had already been scheduled and advertised and were focused primarily on classroom-based interventions and strategies. We were operating as we had since 2014 and weren't prepared for these unforeseen circumstances. When we realized it wasn't working, typically ECHO sessions are scheduled months in advance. However, the nature of the pandemic required a dramatic shift in the spring sessions to focus on virtual learning and support for our students, families, and educators. We didn't plan for a pandemic, and we were operating as we had in the past with our delivery of normal or typical topics and sessions. How we pivoted. During the spring of 2020, we increased our number of sessions to 53 and had almost 2,000 participants. We focused on how each of our established ECHO communities could support one another and welcome participation from each of those networks, which include ECHO and Autism, Early Childhood, Student Health, Assistive Technologies, and an ECHO for Families. We shifted from subject matter experts because we quickly realized there were no experts in this area, and we weren't prepared for virtual learning, quarantine, and really out-of-the-box ways to support and engage our students with disabilities and their caregivers, as well as our families on the Wind River Reservation who didn't have the same access to the tools and resources. We shifted to be more responsive and aware of the current needs, and which often meant that we had a very short time to plan, and our new concerns really came from week to week rather than semester to semester. What we learned, ECHO networks provide a bidirectional flow of concerns and information that's relevant to the participants. We realized that we really are stronger together, and we had a better understanding of the ECHO philosophy of all teach, all learn. We recognize that it's okay to be flexible and responsive and not overly prepared. We also realized that we could all benefit from the variety of our participants and the levels of experience, from our pre-service educators that were in the College of Education to our veteran teachers and professionals that had been working in the field for many years. The value of our existing communities we had created over the years and importance of their perspective, insight, and engagement was really one of the things that I don't think we had really truly understand the impact that we were having with our ECHO communities until we were in this time of crisis. One of our ECHO participants actually said that the networks were a lifeline, and they were very useful and helpful during this really chaotic time that we were all going through together. And I think that was, one of the things we had created these communities, and we were able to support each other and really work through all of the things that we were going through together. So ECHO has been one of the best things that has happened in the universe in Wyoming, because we are so spread out, and this is a way to keep us all connected and learn and grow with each other.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you both, Soraya and Wendy, for sharing your stories and really giving us this, insight into not just how to teach adults, but like the impact that would have on K-12 students, and how to create these communities that really speak to each other and can grow and learn from each other. It's wonderful. We have a couple of questions that come in. We do have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So I'm going to pick and choose. But I'm really wondering how, if you've had any responses from the teachers. You're talking about a lot of positive responses from the teachers in these communities of practice. Did they describe any fails that came up for them? Did they encounter any challenges in trying to adapt and integrate these new practices into their K-12 school communities? And if so, how did you mentor them? How did you work with them to work through their own failures there?
I'll start. I had several teachers who reached out to us outside of the programs in absolute tears because they were so stressed, and it was just so much. And so what they shared was they valued the community of practice, actually, interestingly, more as sort of support, emotional support for them, necessarily as anything direct, because they were under so much stress. There were various things where people would say, look, I need this other thing right now. And so we would do our best to connect them with those resources. But overall, I think it was very, very positive in that regard. Wendy?
I would agree. And I think it fits very well with the theme of this conference. And our teachers were just afraid. They were resistant to change, and they were afraid of failure. So being able to have these communities to talk through those fears and just kind of get excited about the new things that they could implement and try with their students and families.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And my question to you all is, what are you going to take with you forward? What are some adaptations and learning that you have had over this experience that you want to continue? I'll start with Wendy.
Great. I think, just being excited about what's with the change, not being afraid of change, and that we can all learn just as much going through these processes together, and just being innovative. And I think, Wyoming sometimes has a hard time doing that, but I'm proud of the work that we're doing. And I hope that we continue to take this momentum forward and continue to be really flexible and responsible for the needs of our state.
I think one of our main takeaways is when we think about how to help and what challenges to solve, we shouldn't start from a position of what we're comfortable doing as a team. We need to start from a position of looking at what are actually the needs of children and teachers in the area that we're working, and start really with those needs first, and our comfort can come later. We can work things out, but really focusing down on where exactly and how exactly we want to make change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There are more questions coming in. Again, I encourage everyone to bring those questions into the chat. More questions about what exactly Project ECHO is as well. So hopefully people can reach out directly to you with the email address that's in the chat box as well. I wanted to sort of bring us together and discuss where we go from here. I think we've heard some amazing stories of adaptation, using different technologies, meeting students where they are, working with students with disabilities, working with students who are isolated in rural areas that don't have access to internet. How do we meet those challenges, and how can we take this extraordinary adaptation and learning that we've had over the last 2 years and move it forward? So in the beginning of our conversation today, I asked you, what are some things that you've learned? And I want to ask you now, how might you apply the lessons that you've heard from these stories to your own work? Are you inspired to do something differently? So I really would love to hear it. If you could put some comments in the chat, how might you apply lessons from these stories to the story of your own work? And I'll give you a moment to add those in. Everyone gets a few seconds of silence. And then just so people are not concerned that they've dropped off the call, I continue to welcome your comments in the chat. How might you apply these lessons from these stories to the story of your own work? And are you inspired? Is there something that you really want to try? Yes, I'm seeing flexibility, but understanding how to unpack that term. Absolutely. It's not just, trying new things. It's really trying new things with being, as Dr. Trust said in the beginning, alert to the possibilities and responsive, as we just heard from the last two presentations, to our students' needs. Remembering to meet with the students where they are. And of course, in constant change, we're frightened and afraid and dealing with our own things, but remembering that we need to meet students where they are, and hopefully they can meet us where we are as well. Being alert for failure, absolutely, as a way to pivot. And the extraordinary things that can come out of that, yes. Designing course contents to have principles of universal design, yes. Even though it's online, students still need direction. We still need to engage with them and find different ways to connect with them, yes. And risk, absolutely. Risk being a key innovation, absolutely. A key to innovation. If anybody would like to come off mute, I would invite maybe one person if they'd like to share a comment as well. You can feel free to raise your hand with a little hand icon. We have a couple more minutes, so I don't want to taking challenges positively. Thank you. Ali, yes, please.
Oh, yeah, I just want to reiterate the fact that we always have to remember our main role as educators, which is actually how to facilitate learning within different conditions, new conditions, novel conditions, challenges. It's always, we have to revert back to what is our role. And then when you step back and then, change perspective, involve everyone. It's okay to ask for help. That's always out there on the table. Always reminding yourself of what am I here for? What's at stake? Yes, we need courage. We always have to remind ourselves that we are here for our community of students, no matter what level, no matter what ability, what need, and then we'll take it from there. It's always, we facilitate learning, and no matter whatever resources we have available, we have to use them to facilitate learning, because learning is an ongoing process.
Yes,
this is the main
wonderful.
Underlying thing to me.
Yes, yeah, I just the passion and knowing our purpose as educators, and no matter the resources that we can have a positive impact. Yes, I see another person willing to come off mute. Selena.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much for
joining us. I'm asking because the part of this world, internet is really erratic sometimes, so that's why I'm asking. Sorry. So I just wanted to say, when the students, you talked about flexibility, issue of flexibility. So I'm talking about the students that are university students, and as much as they would want to be online, there's a point where using of a platform is a problem, because perhaps electricity is off at that particular time, and the student really wants to get into class. So perhaps in terms of flexibility, we can look at having the educators come back to the students, finding out who missed a class, not because they wanted to, but because maybe they have been waiting for a long time for that class, and then internet bundle goes out, or maybe electricity goes off, and this student really wants to get into class. So that kind of flexibility can really help a lot of students online in this part of the country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, not just flexibility, but empathy, I think also is what you're describing, like understanding that the students may want to be there and they physically can't. We'll take one more comment. Wesley, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. So on the flexibility, for me, practically, it meant that there was no specific, with the platform that we were using, there was no specific class time. We would have the time that I would share notes, and that would be scheduled, but for them, they would take the class anytime. So, and I wasn't as strict as to when to say, is everyone in class at this time, because it was WhatsApp. But with the Zoom, you need everyone there, which wasn't working for us. As Selena has just said, that you get students that can't be online at the same time as you are. But with WhatsApp, they can. It's a repository, and so they can access the material at their convenient time. And yeah, so that's what I learned.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And really, I mean, this understanding that flexibility can mean not having a synchronous course. It can mean having an asynchronous learning experience. And that doesn't mean that students won't participate in and can't be involved in that. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who came off mute. Thank you for the comments I'm still seeing coming into the chat. I really appreciate everyone's participation. I hope that you have gotten out of this even part of what I have gotten out of it. So thank you all so much. I wanted to ask the audience to share a little bit more. As the leader of the USAID Higher Education Learning Network, I am inspired here. And as a global network, I want to help facilitate these kinds of events and help members of our community connect and learn from each other. And so to honor that goal, I was hoping I could ask you to respond, to take this session over really, and to give you an opportunity to share the kinds of tools, the kinds of resources, the learning that would be most helpful for you moving forward. So considering Helen's objective of providing avenues for local and regional global knowledge generation, and to really elevate the experience of the folks who are on the ground doing this all over the world, I wanted to really get your thoughts on some activities and things that Helen could do to support you through something called Slido. So you're going to see on this screen a link to join Slido. This is a tool to poll. It's a little bit more easy to work with than our Google Meet platform. And so I'd like you to do two things. I'd like you to click the link that's coming into the chat. And when that window pops open, type in this code 981740, and that's going to take you to the poll. We're going to ask you a couple of really quick questions. And so for everyone, if you could just make sure that you're on clicking the link and typing in that number. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds to do that. But the first question that I want to ask you is, what kinds of knowledge generation or sharing activities would you like Helen to host or provide in the future? So I've given you some examples here. You can see some options, speaker series, networking events. Yes. Oh, great. I'm seeing some responses here. Trainings and workshops. I love this live tool because we can see it's like a battle. Which answer is going to be the top one? You can choose more than one option as well, just so you know. Wonderful. Okay, so learning events, things like this, maybe more fail-fests on different topics. I think that would be great. How-to notes, training and workshop, networking, evidence, and wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. So I have one more quick question for you, which is, we've explored today experiences in online learning, but what are other higher education topics that you would like to discuss and learn more about? So topics. This is an open-ended poll, so you can type in any answer that you want. Please feel free to put in any topics that are relevant to your context, things that you want to learn about, things that you would like to see more evidence on. It could be in online learning, but it could be in other areas of higher education, faculty development, teacher education, digital tools, inclusive higher education. Yes, we had some great stories today about working with students with disabilities in the higher education space. Ungrading, livelihoods, technology, finance, collaborative online learning. Yes. Collaborative international online learning. Yes. Humanizing learning. I love that phrase. Absolutely. Measurement. Sure. Experiential. Wonderful. We really use these opportunities to ask our audience what they want to see next, and that really drives how Helen approaches our events, how we approach our knowledge. So I really appreciate you all to share your ideas. We will take this. You will see hopefully events and opportunities in the future from Helen that are covering these topics. And please feel free to keep on answering the poll. This is incredibly useful. I'm looking forward really to exploring all of these topics. But actually, I have a resource for you now. So keep the Slido tab open. But if you want to direct your attention back to the screen, I want to share this. USAID has just released this evidence summary called What Works in Online Learning in Higher Education. This Failfest has really offered some examples of what we've done quickly to adapt to the challenges of presented by COVID-19. This evidence summary really explores the work of longtime experts in the online learning space to offer critical conditions for online learning success. It offers evidence on the effectiveness of online learning education to improve access, to improve engagement, and to improve learning outcomes in higher education. So I'd like you all to return to that Slido window and answer one last question about this. So based on the topics that you see here on the screen, is there any aspect of this evidence summary that most interests you? And you can see improving access, pedagogical strategies, systems and infrastructure needs. We heard from Wezi, who's talking about the importance of the expanded data limits in her country to help students engage. So it's one of the topics in this future areas of research. Hopefully none of these, nobody's gonna pick that one. Hopefully there's something here that's of interest to you. Improving access, I'm seeing coming in the poll, lots of individuals interested in that. Great possibilities for improving access with online learning. Yes. Pedagogical strategies. Yes. Okay. Any more votes coming in? I'm seeing a few more people respond. Okay, wonderful. Well, I hope that you will all take the opportunity to find this resource and download it. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you all so much. So I just want to say I really appreciate you all being in community with me today. I learned so much when we have these kinds of events and when we are able to share with each other. If you would like to learn more about this kind of resource or others to improve higher education, or if you want the opportunity to connect and learn more from colleagues, I strongly encourage you to join Helen. So by joining Helen, you have the opportunity to get access to special access to member-only events designed to improve USAID programming or influence the field. And there's an opportunity really to engage with each other. So there's a link in the chat if you would like to join Helen. And I want to say thank you so much to our presenters, to Drs. Trust, Dr. Makwela, and Dr. Gullop, Mr. Hamza, and Ms. Warren, for sharing their insights with us, and to thank you all so much for being here. Members of the Leading and Learning Global platform who have been behind the scenes and putting things into the chat and advancing slides, I appreciate that. Everyone who's helped to produce this event. And please look for a post-event email with our extended Q&A and more opportunities to connect and learn from each other. And with that, we have a couple of more minutes, so please feel free to put more questions in the chat. But I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so glad. This was a wonderful event for you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ali, Wezi, Soraya, Wendy, if you want to come on camera. Thank you. Dr. Trust, wonderful. Yes, our next event is the evidence summary in May. Please join us. We appreciate so much. And sign up to Helen for more information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just waiting to see if there are any other questions that come in at the last minute.
Could you send a link for joining again? I'm having difficulty with that link.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Yes.